Badlands, explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Geopolitics with Ghost. I am your host, Gordon McCormick, the ghost of bass Patrick Henry. This is Badlands Media. Today is November 25th, 2025. Yeah, I thought I'd start a little bit today with a little festive music to get you bumping and grinding, because what a goofy news cycle we're living through right now, where like nothing makes sense and everybody's insane. And so I think the only appropriate way to address the moment and talk about it is just to make fun of it. Like, I just have to make fun of everybody involved. I have to make fun of all the people who are taking this stuff seriously and think this is all very real and very serious. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna keep just going through all the motions of how ridiculous this all is, and we're gonna talk about how ridiculous it is and how funny the news cycle has become. And I'm talking, of course, about Venezuela. That song, I believe, my kids, I have young kids, they watch Disney movies. There's a movie about Colombia, and that's the song from it. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, that'd be a good song to start this off with, because you have Colombia and Venezuela working together on this whatever the hell this whole South America thing is, which we're going to wrap our arms around here. We're going to spend the first probably hour talking about that part of the world, and maybe less depending on how long it takes for us to get through it. But anyway, we ignored it. We ignored it to our detriment last week. Because there was so much other stuff happening, obviously, with MBS and Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. But we're circling back now, to Venezuela. So with that said, how's the chat doing? I haven't been giving the chat enough. What song is that, Ghost? The song is it's from the movie Encanto. I think if you just go look up Encanto song, like, it'll tell you. I can probably figure out what the exact title is, but yeah, it's the song from Encanto. People in the chat asking. I haven't really checked in on the chat a lot because we've been so busy. I feel like I'm flying by the seat of my pants, like, at all times, doing shows. And if you missed the show last night from Book of Trump, Dmitry Medvedev, man, the parallels between what was happening with Medvedev and Putin in 2008 to 2012 and what's happening right now, there's a lot of signal. The Saudi Vision 2030, Russia was doing its own strategy 2020, divesting out of oil, diversifying their economy, trying to build up a high-tech economy, getting away from raw materials like aluminum and oil and getting into high-tech and technology and software. That was all done under Medvedev, who's considered a technocrat. So a lot of interesting stuff. But yeah, let's start with Venezuela, and I'm going to start by pulling up my X account because I have a few good little videos to share. All right, so the first one is we watched this on Badlands Daily, but I'm going to go ahead and play it again, and I'm going to read what he's saying because it's in Spanish. This is from a recent Maduro interview. I figured we play these two videos and then we'll start talking about the headlines because this will kind of be our base layer, our foundation for understanding what exactly is happening here. All right, so he starts off by saying 85% of the billions from the international, I'm going to turn the volume down, the international drug trafficking each year is in the banks in the United States. That's where the cartel is. Let them investigate and uncover it. And the interviewer says money laundering. And he says, and Maduro says, look, I was reviewing the data the vice president shared, and I believe it's over $500 billion annually. That's in the U.S. banking system in legal banks. If they want to investigate a cartel, let them investigate the cartel up north because it's from the United States that all drug trafficking is directed, from South America and from the rest of the world. They also control the opium trade and so on. It's in the United States where the mafias are, where the real cartels are. Yeah. Okay. So this is exactly what we've been saying for years now. He's talking about the CIA. He's talking about Five Eyes. He's talking about Mossad. He's talking about the intelligence agencies. He's talking about certain segments of the U.S. military. I know a lot of people like to think the military is nothing but white hats, but we know better. There are certainly bad actors in the U.S. military at very high positions in the U.S. military. And if you think every person in a military uniform is a good guy, then you are woefully naive and you're living in a utopia world that doesn't delusion that doesn't actually exist. Yes, there are good people in the military, and we have reason to believe that there are good people in the military who are making moves to improve the world. But there are also bad people in the military, and a lot of those bad people were involved in drug trafficking, certainly in Vietnam, certainly in Afghanistan, certainly probably in South America and Central America. So those are just realities, and we have to confront it. And then the other video I wanted to show was probably something I probably should have played this video while the intro music was playing. That would have probably made more sense. So I'm going to fire my producer for not thinking of that. But here's Matt Gaetz sharing a video of Nicolás Maduro. And he says, in a surprising move, Maduro is now doing the Trump dance. And, opinions may vary on whether or not this is the Trump dance, but I think he's probably right. I think this is the Trump dance. And by the way, we have gotten a lot of videos of Maduro dancing lately. He's been dancing nonstop in all these videos, which again, it kind of highlights the absurdity of the whole moment because this guy is purportedly this ruthless dictator who is, an authoritarian cracking down on his people. I mean, to what extent any of that is true, I don't know, but point to me another dictator that dances like that. That dances like, I think I have another one out there. Where's that other video? I had a really good one of him doing a. God, these psyops. As I scroll through my feed, I'm just seeing the psyops, and I'm just the psyops have gotten to a point of absurdity where it's hard to take any of it seriously. But we have to because they apparently are real, quote unquote, according to people we're supposed to trust. Yeah. So here's a video. This one looks a little older, but here's a video of him dancing with the National Assembly. He's wearing the dictator outfit. He's wearing the Kim Jong-un outfit. It's playing on television, and I guess the person who's posting it is looking at the parade area and is noticing that it's empty. These people look like they're inside, so I don't know if the claim is that they're outside at the parade area, but I don't know, man. This is everything is just so retarded. Everybody's so retarded. And then here's another video where the claim is that Maduro is dancing, asking for the U.S. to have sympathy on him, and he's hoping that his dancing is going to get him that sympathy. I mean, the guy's got moves. I'll give him that. Like, he's definitely got some moves. All right. So yeah, this is all super retarded, and I just have to set the tone for how retarded it all is. So let's pivot now to the very serious news. Very, very serious news. As the U.S. designates a supposed Venezuelan cartel as a terrorist organization. Washington previously struck alleged narco-terrorist boats in the Caribbean. The U.S. has formally labeled the Cartel of the Suns a purported criminal syndicate said to operate within Venezuela's security services as a foreign terrorist organization, placing it in the same category as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. You know, silver lining though for Maduro, if the State Department is categorizing you as the same thing as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, just give it a couple years and you will be welcomed into the UN and the White House as a respected world leader, just like Al-Jilani. Announcing the decision on Thursday, the U.S. Treasury repeated longstanding allegations that Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, whose legitimacy Washington disputes, leads the network. The move comes after nearly 2 months of U.S. airstrikes on small boats off Venezuela's coast, which the Pentagon says are aimed at narco-terrorism and which have left around 80 people dead. The term Cartel of the Suns originated in the 1990s as a media reference to alleged corruption among Venezuelan military officers who reportedly wore sun-shaped insignias on their uniforms. In 2020, so this isn't even like they don't even call themselves the Cartel of the Suns. This is just like a name the media gave them. Okay, that sounds kind of a little Seuss there. All right, I'm getting text messages. Nope, all good. Numerous analysts and regional leaders, in 2020, the U.S. indicted Maduro and 14 current or former officials on accusations of drug trafficking and organized crime, claiming that they collectively ran the cartel. Numerous analysts and regional leaders, however, have cast doubt on the cartel's existence. While acknowledging that individual officials may be involved in illicit schemes, skeptics argue that claims of a centralized hierarchical criminal enterprise are unfounded. Justice Minister Diosdado Cabello, one of the Venezuelan officials charged by the U.S., said the Americans labeled anyone who bothers them as cartel members. Colombian President Gustavo Petro dismissed the Cartel of the Suns as a fictional excuse of the far right to bring down governments that do not obey them. And yeah, I mean, that's the same thing they did with the communist label. They just called anyone who opposed them a communist. Some of them actually were communists, some of them less so, but just calling them a communist immediately vilifies them in the minds of Americans back during the Cold War. During U.S. President Donald Trump's first term, Washington recognized opposition figure Juan Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate leader. Though his subsequent attempts to overthrow Maduro failed, the recent U.S. strikes in the Caribbean, combined with a buildup of military assets in the region, have fueled speculation that Washington may be preparing for a renewed effort to remove Maduro from power. And that last little part, I think, jibes with what we talked about on Badlands Daily, but here's an actual article. Venezuela orders international airlines to restart flights. This is from yesterday. IATA says. From Reuters, Venezuela's Aviation Institute told international airlines on Monday that they must resume flights to the country within 48 hours or risk losing their clearance to fly there, the International Air Transport Association said. Several international airlines have canceled their flights departing from Venezuela in recent days after the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration warned major airlines of a potentially hazardous situation when flying over the country. IATA, which represents roughly 350 airlines, criticized the move by Venezuelan authorities, warning that the decision will further reduce connectivity to the country, which is already one of the least connected in the region. Venezuela's information ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment, Reuters was not immediately able to contact the National Aviation Institute for comment. Earlier on Monday, Spanish carrier Air Europa said it was suspending its 5 weekly flights between Madrid and Caracas until conditions allow for the resumption. Airline Plus Ultra also suspended the same route, Spanish media reported. Over the weekend, IAG's Spanish carrier Iberia said it was suspending its Venezuela flights as well, joining other airlines such as Brazil's Gol, Colombia's Avianca, and TAP's Air Portugal. An Iberia spokesperson said on Monday the suspension would last until at least December 1st, while Gol said its Tuesday and Wednesday flights to Caracas were canceled. Turkish Airlines canceled flights through Friday. Last Friday, the U.S. FAA warned about the worsening security situation and heightened military activity in or around Venezuela and said threats could pose risks for aircraft at all altitudes. There has been a massive military buildup in the region in recent months, including the U.S. Navy's largest aircraft carrier, at least 8 other warships, and F-35 aircraft. Oh, super scary stuff, guys. I'm very, very scared about what might happen in Venezuela. Let's see. And then we have this story. Trump ready to talk with Maduro from Axios. The reported move could follow weeks of U.S. narco-terrorism strikes on boats off the Venezuelan coast that have killed about 80. U.S. President Donald Trump plans to speak directly with Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, despite Washington's move to designate him as the head of a terrorist organization. Axios reported on Tuesday, citing administration officials. See, Nicholas, I told you, Maduro, that all you had to do is wait a few days. You're designated a terrorist organization. And the next day, you're probably going to get invited to the White House. Like, you're going to be hanging out with Trump in the White House now. The U.S. has formally designated the Cartel of the Suns, a purported criminal network alleged to operate within Venezuela's security services, as a foreign terrorist organization, putting it in the same category as Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Announcing the step on Monday, the U.S. Treasury reiterated longstanding allegations that Maduro, whose legitimacy Washington disputes, heads the group. According to Axios, Trump's move marks a notable turn in his gunboat diplomacy toward Venezuela and could indicate that U.S. missile strikes or ground operations are unlikely in the near future. Quote, nobody is planning to go in and shoot him or snatch him at this point. I wouldn't say never, but that's not the plan right now. An anonymous official familiar with the matter told Axios, quote, in the meantime, we're going to blow up boats shipping drugs. We're going to stop the drug trafficking. The official reportedly added, no date has been set for a potential call between Trump and Maduro, which is in the planning stages. Axios reported citing another U.S. official. The move follows nearly 2 months of U.S. airstrikes on small boats off Venezuela's coast. Actions, the Pentagon says, target narco-terrorism and that have killed about 80 people. The term Cartel of the Suns emerged in the 1990s as a media label for the alleged corruption among Venezuelan officers who wore sun-shaped insignias. In 2020, the U.S. indicted Maduro. Yes, this was all copy and pasted from their other article they wrote. Trump has reportedly green-lighted a range of measures to pressure Venezuela to prepare for a possible broader military campaign, including covert CIA operations targeting Maduro's government. Caracas has denounced the U.S. military buildup as a violation of its sovereignty and an attempted coup, putting its forces on high alert. Maduro, meanwhile, has said Venezuela is prepared for face-to-face talks with Washington. All right, so I have to just again, I'm going to keep making fun of everybody involved in this, and I'm not pointing any of this at Trump. I actually think Trump is making fun of them himself because he's doing all of these things that kind of contradict one another while ostensibly taking this very seriously. And really the people who are suffering the most right now are like the State Department and the bureaucrats who think any of this stuff actually means anything, like terrorist designations or what does a terrorist designation even mean at this point? Like if Jelani and ISIS are designated as terrorists, but then Jelani comes and hangs out at the White House with Trump, and then Maduro is designated as a terrorist leader, but then he comes and hangs out with Trump or jumps on a phone call with him. I mean, does that designation even mean anything at this point? You know what I mean? So I found that interesting. And I wanted to pull up this map This is an interesting map. And then just for those who weren't watching Badlands Daily this morning, so most of you probably were, but if you weren't, this is the screenshot that I pulled. I had the live FAA website open on Badlands Daily, but here's the screenshot I pulled from International Security, a NOTAM, a notice to all airmen, which is what it stands for. And it says operators are advised to exercise caution when operating in the Maiquetía flight information region at all altitudes due to the worsening security situation and heightened military activity in or around Venezuela. Threats could pose a potential risk to aircraft at all altitudes, including during overflight, the arrival and departure of phases of flight and or airports and aircraft on the ground. Refer to the background information notice for additional information on threat concerns for U.S. civil aviation operations in the affected airspace, and it gives you a link. Provide at least 72-hour advance notice of planned flights to the in part 1 of 2. Report any safety security incidents observed experience while operating in the affected airspace to the FAA's Washington Operations Center, and it gives you a phone number. And then here's the Maiquetía, I think I'm saying that right, region, and you can see it encompasses most of Venezuela. It's like the western portion and the central portion of Venezuela. It notably does not have the or actually wait, this is all of Venezuela. This is all of Venezuela, yeah, because this is Colombia over here. So this is, yeah, okay, so I stand corrected. Earlier on Balance Daily, I said this isn't all of Venezuela, but actually I think it is. It's just the way the map is shown, and these dashed lines had me a little thrown off. But yeah, because Sector Noreste is Colombia. It's interesting how they have a sector right there for Noreste. But anyway, this is for all of Venezuela. So, and then I found this map. I don't know how accurate this map is, but I think somebody made this. I don't know if this is true or not, if this is all accurate, but you got the USS Iwo Jima, the USS Gravely, the USS Sampson, the submarine. This is definitely not accurate because they don't have the aircraft carrier here. And I don't think any of these ships are actually stationed where they're showing it. So delete. Congratulations, you failed. Okay, this map actually is useful. This one is showing us where these strikes have hit. So U.S. strikes have hit boats across the wide region. One of them was near the Dominican Republic. 2 of them were off of the coast of Colombia. 5 of them were off the coast of central Venezuela, and then 1 was off the coast of eastern Venezuela. And then actually it's showing 4 strikes off the coast of Colombia down here in the Pacific, and then 3 strikes over here off the coast of Mexico in the Pacific. That is interesting, and that adds up to 7, 9, 13, 16. Weird. It says source is armed conflict location and event data from the BBC. So the BBC never lies, guys. So we wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't accuse them of being fake news. All right. So how the U.S., this is from Time Magazine, public and politicians feel about potential war with Venezuela. And this is more like an op-ed, but the U.S. is set to launch new operations against Venezuela and its president, Nicolás Maduro. Reuters reported over the weekend as U.S. President Donald Trump's administration escalates what increasingly looks like a war against the Latin American nation over its alleged role in the international narcotics trade. Since September 2nd, U.S. military strikes on alleged drug boats have killed at least 83 people in the Caribbean, raising questions about the legality of such operations and whether Trump is seeking a fight elsewhere to ease political pressures at home. Some observers even think Trump's ultimate goal may be regime change in Venezuela, seeking to force out the authoritarian Maduro, whose most recent successive U.S. administrations have not recognized as legitimate, and whom the State Department alleges to be head of a cartel recently designated a terrorist organization. A move Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Friday brings new options to how the U.S. combats narco-terrorism in the region. Nothing, including a potential land-based operation, Hegseth said, was off the table. Then it goes on to say that a CBS News YouGov poll conducted from November 19th through 21st shows that 70% of respondents oppose U.S. military action in the South American country, and 56% believe any military action will have no effect on the amount of drugs entering the United States. In a November poll from Reuters and Ipsos also found that a majority of Americans believe the risks of U.S. military action in Venezuela outweigh the benefits, though attitudes largely split along party lines, with Republicans more supportive. Imagine that. The Republicans are warmongering neocons. I don't believe any of this stuff, by the way. I don't believe any of these polls are real, but I do probably think that 70% of Americans probably look at this and they're like, I don't want us going to war with Venezuela. Like, there's other ways to handle this. I would probably agree with that. Let's see. Senator Rand Paul, oh, hey, Rand, on Sunday warned of potential fractures within the GOP, where some members have already questioned the administration's boat bombing campaign, echoing congressional Democrats' misgivings about Trump's actions in Venezuela. Quote, I think once there's an invasion of Venezuela, said Paul on CBS News, quote, I think you'll see a splintering and a fracturing of the movement that has supported the president. Quote, I think a lot of people, including myself, he explained, were attracted to the president because of his reticence to get us involved in foreign war. Paul, who was one of two Republicans, along with Alaska's Senator Lisa Murkowski, who voted with Senate Democrats in a failed bid to require congressional approval before Trump takes any military action against Venezuela, criticized the administration's latest terrorist designation on Cartel de los Soles, saying, quote, I think by doing this, they're pretending as if we are at war. They're pretending as if they've gotten something imprimatur to do what they want. Speaking to the AFP, Mexico-based academic Juan Manuel Track said the terrorist designation, which went into effect Monday, quote, creates the perception that some kind of attack is almost imminent in Venezuela. Trump said last week that the designation gives the U.S. military more options to target Maduro's assets, though he also indicated a willingness to speak to Maduro to try to find a diplomatic solution to the standoff. Other Republicans, while not as explicitly rebuking the administration as Paul, have also expressed concern about continuing U.S. military activity around Venezuela. Senator Todd Young voted against the legislation that Paul Murkowski supported, but he clarified in a statement that his vote was not an endorsement of the administration's current course in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, and that he is troubled by many aspects and assumptions of this operation and believe it is at odds with the majority of Americans who want the U.S. military less entangled in international conflicts. And, I would tend to agree with that. I think that Todd Young, wherever his heart may lie, is probably right. I think most people don't want to see us get involved in a foreign war. I also think that taking down the cartels is actually a pretty easy thing. It can be done without a substantial military operation. Going back to the point that Nicolás Maduro made, whenever he made did that interview, go after the U.S. banks that are helping the cartels launder the money. I mean, don't we have Executive Order 13818? Can't we target people who are engaged in human trafficking and human rights violations? Can't we seize their assets if their assets are in U.S. banks? Or not seize them, I'm sorry, freeze them. We don't seize with Executive Order 13818. We just freeze. Why can't we freeze their assets? We probably have, frankly. That probably happened a long time ago. That's part of the reason I don't believe a lot of this stuff. I think a lot of this is just bluster and narrative that we're being fed that ultimately are not that aren't real. So take that for what it's worth. Let's see. There was another one specific story. Okay, so let's watch this interview from Fox News from Maria Elvira Salazar. I think this is from last night, and she is definitely one of the people at the tip of the spear in trying to overthrow Maduro. She's at the very front of the line of these South Florida, Miami Republicans who want to. Who are neocons who just want to use the U.S. military to intervene in Central and South America. And these people, these Hispanics in South Florida need to understand something. If you're here and you're an American, your interests are in America. Your interests are not back home with grandma and grandpa and mommy and daddy, wherever they may live. Your interests are here. You're an American. It's America first, and maybe even America only. We don't use our military to go liberate people from foreign dictators. It's not what our military is for. It's never what our military was intended to do. And even if you accept the premise that Maduro is a ruthless dictator, it's not our job to overthrow him. So with that said, let's listen to what this lady has to say.
Americans who do not understand why we need to go in for three reasons. You're in Fox Business. Venezuela, for the American oil companies, will be a field day because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity. American companies can go in and fix all the oil pipe, the whole oil rigs, and everything that has to do with the Venezuelan petroleum companies, or everything that has to do with oil and the derivatives. Number two, Americans who do not understand why we need.
We're gonna go overthrow. We're gonna go overthrow Maduro to get the oil. I've seen this movie before, just like when we overthrew Saddam Hussein to get the oil. And I remember what Trump's attitude about that is he said, it's not worth it. It's not worth the oil. But if you're going in there, you might as well take the oil. That's what he said. But he said, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth the oil. And why is it not worth the oil? Because we have oil under the ground here in the United States that we can go extract. We don't need to go do this bullshit. Okay. And I actually want to find, I want to find Salazar's full interview if we can, because I want to hear the other points that she's making. Just give me a second. Stand by for processing. I'm only seeing the 30-second clip. Oh, that one's in Spanish. All right, here we go. And I think she's about to make the exact same point. I was really hoping we were going to get the entire clip, but I think we're only going to get a minute and a half. But let's listen to this because this will give us a little more context.
I would love to see a change in government. My wife's from Nicaragua. We know how terribly the dictators there rely on Venezuelan oil. But at the same time, a lot of Americans don't want actual U.S. participation in regime change in Venezuela. They would much prefer the Venezuelans to do it on their own. Do you think the pressure that Maduro has received will force him to leave on his own?
Oh, I think Maduro is not Fidel Castro. Maduro is not a brave boy. So now that he has understood that he's on that very nefarious list of the terrorist organization, that the airspace above Venezuela has been closed off and the commercial airlines from the United States are not flying, he's understanding that we're about to go in. He understands that he has been our enemy for the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. Venezuela, for those Americans who do not understand why we need to go in, for three reasons. You're in Fox Business. Venezuela, for the American oil companies, will be a field day because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity. American companies can go in and fix all the oil pipe, the whole oil rigs, and everything that has to do with the Venezuelan petroleum companies, or everything that has to do with oil and the derivatives.
Yeah, so it's the same nonsense, and that's fine. And so here, I want to refute this woman. Like she's just, God, man, she's sitting here telling us this is all about the oil. We want the oil. We're going to get the oil. You greedy, like turn on your envy, turn on your greed, turn on your, like your mouth's going to water at how much money we're going to make. Here's the problem with that argument. Let's go here. This is from back in February from the Financial Times. Trump cancels Chevron's oil license in Venezuela. The decision to reverse Biden-era concession agreement delivers a blow to U.S. oil group and Maduro's sanctioned regime. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced the cancellation of a concession agreement on Venezuela's energy sector that allowed Chevron to pump and export oil in the sanctioned South American country. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Trump on Wednesday said he was reversing the concessions granted by Joe Biden's administration in November 2022. Quote, we are hereby reversing the concessions that crooked Joe Biden gave the Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela on the oil transaction agreement, and also having to do with electoral conditions within Venezuela, which have not been met by the Maduro regime, Trump wrote. The measures were an effort to coax Maduro, Venezuela's authoritarian president, into holding free and fair presidential elections. Though Trump did not mention Chevron by name, it is the only company that was granted a license to operate with Venezuela's state-owned Petróleos de Venezuela, PDVSA, in the November 2022 concession. Other licenses have been granted to Repsol, INI, and Murel and Prom. That Murel and Prom, it looks like is one company. Chevron said it was considering the implications of the decision, adding that it conducted its business in Venezuela in compliance with all laws and the sanctions framework provided by the U.S. government. Analysts said the loss of the Chevron license would inflict a blow to Venezuela's oil regime. Quote, the loss of diluent supplied by Chevron is a major problem. It was a lifeline for their production, said Shriner Parker, an analyst at Ristad Energy, a consultancy. Diluent is a substance oil producers use to thin out the type of heavy crude produced in Venezuela, and it is critical to its extraction and transportation. Parker said that the loss of diluent could cause Venezuela's oil production to fall below 500,000 barrels a day, down from just over 900,000 barrels a day last year. Despite boasting the world's largest proven oil reserves and being a founding member of OPEC, corruption, mismanagement, and U.S.-led sanctions caused the country's crude production to plummet from about 2.5 million barrels a day in 2016 to 400,000 barrels a day in 2020. It recovered last year in part because of Chevron's joint venture. As Drubal Oliveros, a director at Caracas-based consultancy Eco Analytica, predicted the rescinding of Chevron's license could cause GDP growth to shrink from 3.2% to 2% this year. Obviously, eliminating licenses has a significant impact not only on growth, but also on the outlook for foreign exchange flows, inflation, and devaluation. Maduro was inaugurated as president for a third term in January, despite widespread evidence of fraud in last year's election. Actually, that's only based on the State Department's assertion, the CIA's assertion, Maria Corina Machado's assertion. Pretty much every other country has come out and said that they don't think that they personally have not seen any evidence of this, and that they think the State Department might be lying about that. So we'll see. I mean, including Russia saying that, China saying that. So anyway, let's see. Then you fast forward. Let me look this up. You fast forward to this article, and while I'm pulling that up, there was a Chevron court ruling in Venezuela from this year. We'll look at that one too. All right, so this article is from the AP. Trump cuts financial lifeline for Venezuela's government by ending permit to export oil to U.S. This is the same thing. This is just from a different outlet, different perspective. Okay. So then we fast forward to July. Chevron can resume oil production in Venezuela as Trump administration reverses policy. So what happened between February and July? Well, there was, let's see. There was this article from March. Crude consequences, the end of Venezuela's license or Chevron's license in Venezuela. What has happened on February 27th? President Trump axed Chevron's activities in Venezuela and gave the corporation a 30-day period to wind down operations in the South American country. Chevron will no longer be able to export Venezuelan crude oil. Let's see, Chevron in Venezuela. The 2023 Barbados agreement between the Plataforma Unitaria Democrática, the leading opposition party in Venezuela, and the regime of Nicolás Maduro sought an approach to free and fair elections that exchanged democratic promises for licenses for American companies in the South American nation. This is according to Blinken, a statement by Tony Blinken from 2023. Enabling corporate activities to produce and export oil and gas in Venezuela look to incentivize the Maduro administration to commit to the electoral roadmap outlined with the opposition, particularly the reinstatement of all political candidates and the guaranteed involvement and protection in the presidential election process. In essence, the Biden administration attempted to pursue a carrot and stick method that coerced the Maduro regime into democratic reform. Sanctions relief was revoked in part in January 2024 after opposition candidate Maria Corina Machado was disqualified from political representation for 15 years by the Supreme Tribunal of Justice for alleged connection to the corruption plot of disputed interim president Juan Guaido in a weak attempt by Washington to force Caracas to concede. The straw that broke the camel's back appears to be the attempted arrest of now opposition leader Corina Machado by militant forces of the Nicolás Maduro regime on January 9th, 2025, an outright violation of the Barbados Agreement. Trump's take on Maduro. During his first stint in the White House, President Trump installed a maximum pressure campaign on the Maduro regime, applying sanctions and military threats in an effort to flip military chiefs against the Venezuelan autocracy and ignite an internal transition towards democracy. Despite this, American aggression shored up support for Maduro and only harshened economic conditions on ordinary Venezolanos. I think those are Venezuelan citizens. Nonetheless, with the appointment of former Florida Senator Marco Rubio to the Secretary of State position, a vocal opponent to Maduro's narco regime, it appears the White House's approach is likely to regurgitate its hawkish stance that attempts to pressure Caracas into internal change. Revoking the Chevron license is a step in that process. Ending oil exportation from Venezuela not only condemns continued autocracy by the Maduro regime, it also appears as a punishment for illegal flows of migrants into the United States and a failure of the Maduro regime to expedite migrant returns back to Venezuela. In essence, Chevron's license termination intends to mirror the effects of the tariff hikes threatened on Canada, Mexico, and China for continued flows of fentanyl over American borders. The potential economic consequences have already been recognized, with Venezuelan business guild Fedecamaros urging the White House to return to the negotiating table to inhibit the severe impact of the Venezuelan economy threatened by the license termination. What comes next? With the license revoked and sanctions restored, the Venezuelan ability to contribute and legally settle the United States, ending exports of up to 220,000 barrels per day. Likewise, barring American companies from extracting and producing oil will also diminish Venezuelan oil supply to global markets, with the process returning to the sole domain of state-owned Petróleos de Venezuela, SA, which is PDVSA. Supply will decrease. If OPEC Plus members are unable to compensate for the shortfall, the supply-demand imbalance will drive up oil prices. Fortunately, on March 3rd, producers for the global cartel committed to restore halted outputs. Following pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump to drive down global oil prices, the group will aim to increase production by 138,000 barrels per day in April after almost 2 years of limited production, part of a wider strategy to restore 2.2 million barrels per day by 2026. However, restored OPEC Plus output is not fully guaranteed in the long run, as the cartel reserves the ability to pause or reverse supply contingent on market conditions. Likewise, global oil prices also remain reliant on a peace deal in the Ukraine conflict and the subsequent restoration of Russian-supplied oil to global markets. As for Chevron, CEO Mike Wirth has said the company will look to transition investment into Asia as its activities in Venezuela come to a close in the short term, but urges a less tumultuous approach to licensing in Venezuela that will contribute to consistency in the energy industry. This stability is unlikely to come under the current Trump administration, at least not until the congressional midterms and possible change in the GOP-controlled legislature. So again, this was written on March 24th. And this is from the Atlas Institute for International Affairs, which is probably some deep state think tank. I mean, who knows, right? Okay, so we now then jump ahead to July 25th. Chevron can resume oil production in Venezuela as Trump administration reverses policy. It says the Trump administration has agreed to let Houston-based Chevron again pump oil in Venezuela, reversing a hardline policy against the South American dictatorship. Details of the agreement aren't clear, according to the Wall Street Journal, which first reported the story, but allows Chevron to produce oil in Venezuela and export it to the United States for 6 months. Under the agreement, which can be renewed, no royalties or taxes will go to Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro's government. Quote, Chevron conducts its business globally in compliance with laws and regulations applicable to its business, as well as the sanctions framework provided for by the United States, by the U.S. government, including in Venezuela, a Chevron spokesperson wrote in a statement to the Houston Chronicle. The agreement follows the release of 10 Americans detained by Maduro in exchange for more than 250 Venezuelans deported by the U.S. to El Salvador, the Associated Press reported. And then this is the one that I wanted to talk about. We'll talk about that in a second. The Wall Street Journal reported that the president spoke last week with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Rick Grenell, and other senior administration officials, where he advocated for a U.S. deal with Venezuela, which has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. The White House did not immediately respond to Chronicle's request for comment. The Trump administration this year revoked Chevron's Biden-era license to pump oil in Venezuela, saying that Maduro was not legitimately elected and had refused to accept deportation flights. The Wall Street Journal reported the move was championed by critics of Maduro's government, including Rubio. Quote, while we cannot speak to any specific licenses, the U.S. government will not allow the Maduro regime to profit from the sale of oil, a State Department spokesperson wrote in the statement to the Houston Chronicle. Quote, we will continue to deny any funding the Maduro regime uses to oppress the Venezuelan people. The official said the U.S. government will help U.S. companies without helping the Maduro regime. Okay. And then here's the 10 Americans that it cites being, this is from July 19th. Venezuela on Friday released 10 jailed U.S. citizens as permanent residents in exchange for getting home scores of migrants deported by the United States to El Salvador months ago under the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. The complex three-country arrangement represents a diplomatic arrangement for Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, helps President Donald Trump in his goal of bringing home Americans jailed abroad, and lands Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele, a swap that he proposed months ago. Every wrongfully detained American in Venezuela is now free and back in our homeland, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement, which he thanked Bukele, an ally. And I want to know who these people are. Let's see. The photo released by El Salvador's presidential press office shows men who El Salvador's government identifies as Venezuelans, who the U.S. government detained and flew to El Salvador months ago, boarding a Venezuelan plane bound for Venezuela. I want to see. Families say the Americans released are innocent. The State Department office responsible for negotiating the release of American detainees posted a photo Friday evening of the newly released prisoners smiling for the camera inside an airplane, bringing them home, some clutching an unfurled American flag. A plane carrying the freed Americans arrived late Friday evening at Joint Base San Antonio, with some waving flags rushing to embrace welcomers as they landed. Among those released was 37-year-old Lucas Hunter, whose family says he was kidnapped in January by Venezuelan border guards from inside Colombia, where he was vacationing. We cannot wait to see him in person and help him recover from this ordeal. Venezuelan authorities detained a dozen U.S. citizens in the second half of 2024 and linked them to alleged plots to destabilize the country. I was waiting for that. There you go. We have prayed for this day for almost a year. My brother is an innocent man who was used as a political pawn by the Maduro regime, said a statement from Christian Castaneda, whose brother Wilmer, a Navy SEAL, was arrested in his Caracas hotel room last year. Global Reach, a nonprofit organization that had advocated for his release and that of several other Americans, said Venezuelan officials initially and falsely accused him of being involved in a plot, but backed off that claim. Okay, so why are all these guys who are being returned? They're all military-age men. They claim that one of them is a former U.S. Navy SEAL. I mean, this fits the template for Operation Gladio. I'm not saying that's what was happening here, but we do have a number of failed operations like the Bay of Piglets from 2021, maybe it was 2020, which was an actual failed Operation Gladio regime change operation. It's just like these people, these young men, these are 30 some year old men. They're right at that age where it's like they would have served 10 years, 15 years in the U.S. military, acquiring a certain set of skills that they then retire from the U.S. military and go on to become mercenaries and are then, contractors that are then hired by the CIA to go overthrow foreign governments. The Green Berets are most notoriously linked to this process, primarily in Panama. That's like the most famous place that the Green Berets were operating and overthrowing the government of Panama. But this is exactly what the template is. So we don't know the truth, but man, there's certainly a lot of smoke. Certainly a lot of smoke. So here's another one. In May, Venezuela freed a U.S. Air Force veteran after about 6 months in detention. Joseph St. Clair's family has said the language specialist who served 4 tours in Afghanistan had traveled to South America to seek treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe. Could also be a cover for the CIA sending somebody down there who is did 4 tours in Afghanistan to overthrow the Maduro regime. I mean, that stuff happens too. So I'm not accusing that guy of being that, but I'm just saying that we have to be very aware of what's happening here. So here's another article from July. It says, this is a commentary. Trump's new Venezuela oil waiver raises more questions than answers. On July 24th, the Trump administration quietly granted a new sanctions waiver allowing U.S. energy major Chevron to resume operations in Venezuela. The move took many by surprise, as the White House had just retightened oil sanctions to put pressure on the Nicolás Maduro regime, but it followed closely on the heels of a high-profile prisoner exchange involving 10 Americans, 250 Venezuelan migrants, and the dozens of political detainees. This time, unlike in previous rounds, the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control issued a private license, its terms not available to the public. Sources familiar with the matter say Chevron will pay Venezuela in crude rather than in cash. Yet this arrangement risks undermining the very policy objective it claims to support, limiting revenue flows to Maduro and his cronies. Where did this license come from? Since February, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his allies have been scrambling to eliminate every single sanctions exception. We know what we know as OFAC licenses related to Venezuela. While most were related to the production and export of crude oil, there were also authorizations for Shell and BP to develop new offshore gas fields split between Trinidad and Venezuela. And the last one to be axed did not even provide income for Maduro's government. It merely allowed the country to import liquefied petroleum gas, propane and butane, ostensibly on humanitarian grounds. Then, in a marked shift, the U.S. administration granted a new private license for Chevron to restart operations barely 2 months after a public announcement that all oil-related activities would be wound down by May 27th. The timing was not coincidental. The lead up to the waiver, Washington and Caracas completed a sweeping prisoner swap. El Salvador sent home 250 Venezuelan migrants, allegedly members of criminal gangs such as the Tren de Aragua, whom the U.S. had deported to the infamous Psyop mega prison. And the Maduro government released 5 U.S. citizens, 5 green card holders, and dozens of political prisoners, specifically more than the 80 releasees initially expected. Since the start of the administration, Trump's special envoy, Richard Grenell, had tried to strike deals with the Maduro government on precisely the same thing, prisoner swaps and oil licenses, but he was repeatedly shut down by Marco Rubio, a hardliner known for his visceral opposition to socialist regimes like Cuba and Venezuela. This time around, however, the Secretary of State not only allowed the deal to go through, but is said to have participated in the negotiations in an official capacity. A Trump administration official who did not wish to be named says that Rubio has now lost his argument. Quote, "We've tried sanctions and pressure and achieved nothing. The opposition is not taking power anytime soon, end quote. In the meantime, a different approach would focus on freeing Americans in Venezuela and favoring U.S. companies to do business in the country at the expense of China. Indeed, under the current sanctions regime, Washington has handed Beijing a de facto monopoly, or monopsony, a buyer's monopoly, on Venezuela over the past 2 months. China has snapped up almost all of Venezuela's oil exports, save for some token shipments to Cuba. The Asian superpower is also the top buyer, or in some cases, the only one, for many of Venezuela's strategic minerals like iron ore, cassiterite, and rare earths. Why the oil licenses matter for Venezuela and for the U.S. The way the Venezuelan state benefits from Chevron's license is not as clear-cut as many think. Let's take a moment to consider how the authorizations, namely General License 41 and later specific licenses for Repsol, Murel at Prom, and others had functioned up until earlier this year. The private oil company would produce crude in local joint ventures with state-owned oil company PDVSA and then be assigned a certain amount to sell overseas, generating revenues. It would then have to pay taxes and royalties to the state. In very simplistic terms, the government and the private company would be splitting export profits 50-50. Otherwise, PDVSA would be exporting oil directly and cashing in 100%. So why would the Venezuelan government want a Chevron license? It may be a case of short-term pain for long-term gain. Foreign oil companies have historically been more efficient at boosting production than PDVSA. As long as they had licenses, this is due to a mix of factors, including better management and having sanctions waivers. Thanks to the latter reason, international oil majors can also sell crude at more profitable prices as opposed to sanctioned sellers who have to offer steep discounts and pay for higher freight and insurance costs. Under sanctions, Venezuelan crude barrels have seen discounts of as much as $35. The extra revenues that foreign oil companies generate have an outsized effect on the Venezuelan economy. These sell hard currency into local FX market to pay wages, suppliers, and taxes. By doing so, they create a lifeline, not much for Maduro, but for private businesses, but for many private businesses in dire need of U.S. dollars. In short, they have a stabilizing impact on the economy. For the U.S., this was also a desired outcome as it would bring more transparency on top of benefiting the local private sector. According to Eco Analytica, a Venezuelan consulting firm, the three main foreign oil producers with OFAC licenses, Chevron, Repsol, and Muriel et Prom, contributed 40% of the hard currency that was sold in the FX market in 2024 via private banks. So what does the new Chevron license look like? The new Chevron license is officially a closely guarded secret, but many sources and experts are already discussing details emerging from the leaks. The widely circulated version sees Chevron compensating the Maduro government with crude instead of in the local bolivar, as discussed above. If confirmed, this deal would reflect incredibly simplistic thinking on the part of policymakers in the Trump administration. So just to recap what they're saying here, they're saying they're basically just giving Maduro oil, like crude oil, to go sell on his own, which he can then go turn around and do, as opposed to paying him in U.S. dollars. PDVSA, while receiving crude as payment, would remain under sanctions. It would therefore be incentivized to continue selling to China through intermediaries at steep discounts as it is now doing, rather than allowing Chevron to ship that oil to American refineries. The current arrangement already benefits Beijing at Washington's expense. Payments would be made in USDT, yes, the so-called stable coin, or via flying suitcases of hard currency destined straight for regime insiders and bypassing the broader economy altogether. So payments would be made in stablecoin. That is very interesting. If this is the license that ultimately emerges, it will only serve to entrench corruption, bolster Chinese access to cheap crude, and further weaken Venezuela's struggling private sector while denying U.S. Gulf Coast refiners a reliable stream of heavy oil. And yet the Secretary of State will still be able to claim technically that Chevron is not paying U.S. dollars to Maduro. That leaves a more fundamental question. What comes next? Is the Trump administration's strategy simply to keep the pressure on indefinitely, hoping Maduro eventually relents, no matter how many years or decades that might take. Maduro, Marco Rubio is surely familiar with the Cuban case study that bears his name, or is there at last a plan to negotiate, one that accepts the need for difficult concessions on both sides? For now, the license looks more like a political fig leaf than a path towards resolution. Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you dig into the details of this stuff, it actually seems like these waivers aren't quite what the MSM is presenting them to be to us. And then there is the acquisition of the Hess Corporation by Chevron. This is from July as well. And I think this actually has something to do with everything we just read and why Trump gave this concession to Venezuela. So I remember reporting on this or reading about this or talking about this or whatever in the Financial Times of London back in July. And it was very unclear when the story broke what significance it had, like what it actually meant. So this is from the Houston Chronicle, July 18th, 2025. Let's turn on the chat so the chat can hang out on screen with me. All right. Chevron finalizes a $55 billion deal for Hess, ending dispute with Exxon over Guyana oil field stake. Chevron completed its $55 billion acquisition of Hess Friday, closing out a contentious legal dispute with ExxonMobil over offshore oil assets in Guyana that shocked the oil industry. A ruling handed down this week by an arbitration panel of the International Chamber of Commerce, or ICC, in Paris cleared the way for Chevron to tap into Hess's 30% stake of the Stabroek block, a more than 6 million acre oil and gas rich area offshore Guyana. The production potential stemming from Guyana's offshore oil fields attracted the oil majors as companies struggle to find new avenues for growth beyond the next few years as mineral availability in the U.S. plateaus. It also spawned one of the most aggressive disputes between two oil majors since Pennzoil and Texaco fought over Texaco's acquisition of Getty Oil in the 1980s. How the acquisition will impact Hess's workforce in Houston is not immediately clear, but cuts were expected. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth said on CNBC that he anticipated there would be some staff reductions as the two companies integrate. Hess, headquartered in New York, had a regional office in Houston, although the number of employees is unclear. Chevron employs about 7,000 people in the Houston area. Okay, then it goes on and says Chevron had already been reducing its workforce, announcing its in February plans to lay off up to 20% of its global workforce. Those cuts, which were expected to begin in West Texas this week, were to affect 200 workers at 3 Chevron facilities in Midland County, according to Texas Workforce Commission. Quote, as is typical in a deal like this, there are some overlaps, and so you'll see some reductions, Wirth said in an interview. A spokesperson for Chevron declined to comment whether these layoffs would directly impact Houston jobs. Chevron struck its deal to acquire Hess in October 2023. Exxon tried to block the move last year, saying it had a right of first refusal to buy Hess's Guyana assets because of its joint operating agreement with Hess and the China National Offshore Oil Company, or CNOOC, for the Stabroek block. Exxon maintains a 45% stake in the Stabroek block, while CNOOC holds a 25% stake. Chevron, based in Houston, and Hess argued that the right of first refusal only applied to individual asset sales, not the acquisition of the entire company. The ICC court ruled Thursday in their favor. That was the article that I remember reading in the Financial Times of London. We have maintained from the beginning that this is the outcome that we expected. It is a straightforward interpretation of contract language, and we are very pleased that the transaction is now closed, Wirth said on CNBC's Squawk on the Street Friday morning. A spokesperson for Exxon said that while the company disagrees with the ICC's panel interpretation, it welcomes Chevron to the venture in Guyana. As, quote, as we've said before, ExxonMobil and CNOOC are aligned that we had a duty to ensure contract terms are always adhered to and not set a bad precedent for ourselves and industry. The spokesperson said in an emailed statement, quote, given the significant value we've created in the development of the Guyana resource, we believed we had a clear duty to our investors to consider our preemptive rights to protect the value we created through our innovation and hard work at the time when no one knew just how successful the venture would be. In addition to Hess's stake in Guyana, Chevron's acquisition includes assets across the Permian Basin, Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, in the DJ Basin in Colorado. The move should amount to about 4 million total barrels of net oil equivalent production per day. Before the news of the ICC's decision broke, the Federal Trade Commission issued its own order regarding the acquisition and allegations that the chief executive of Hess, John Hess, was colluding with the Organization of Petroleum Export Countries, or OPEC, regarding their agenda to consolidate and puppet master of the oil market. The commission last year issued an order blocking John Hess from joining Chevron's board. The allegations against Hess mirrored those levied against Pioneer Natural Resources founder Scott Sheffield, who was similarly barred from joining Exxon's board. The commission said Friday it was reversing those decisions and allowing Hess and Sheffield to join the boards of Chevron and Exxon, respectively. Okay, so that was a lot to take in, and I appreciate you bearing with me as I read through it. We're about to take a commercial break because we're past the hour, but I just want to point out, if we go back to my mind map, the Stabroek block in Guyana, remember, Guyana and Venezuela side by side, and remember, my interpretation of all this is that a lot of this, it is about the oil, but it's about the control of the oil. Who has the oil rights and who's issuing those rights? And as I understand it under the law, is that the resources are supposed to belong to the respective countries where they belong, which means the governments of those countries are responsible for issuing the rights to extract those resources, whether it's oil or diamonds or gold or copper or whatever it is. And so with Guyana, there's been this long spat over whether Guyana, whether the lines of Guyana are drawn accurately, and ultimately whether, let me find the right map that I have here, and whether, I think this is right. Is it semaphore? Yeah, here it is. So here's the map. And so here's Venezuela on the left. Here's Guyana, the yellow country right there on the right. And then this green is the oil field, right? That's being extracted. So here's the oil. Here's a block showing what that looks like. And as you can see, the Stabroek block, that's like where all of the oil is, right? And you can kind of see how these maps line up. Like Trinidad and Tobago is this giant island. It's a little island, but giant island off the coast of Venezuela. You can see on this like more simplified map, Trinidad and Tobago is not shown here, but it would be about right here. Okay. So that's Trinidad and Tobago. And then you can see the line right here dividing the national borders of Guyana and Venezuela. So under international law, as I understand it, every country controls 200 miles out from their coastline. Everything in that water, under the water, is considered theirs. That's their waterway. That's before you reach what's called international waters. And so, and basically you draw like an infinite line going down, like everything under the water, under the ground is, belongs to that country. Okay. And so Guyana, with British backing and the London banks and all of them, because Guyana is a British Commonwealth, they've been saying that all this oil actually belongs to Guyana. So these oil companies should be negotiating with the Guyanese government. I think it's how you say it. Or the Guyanan government for the rights to extract the oil. But what Maduro is saying is that actually the borders of Guyana are not accurately drawn, and everything shown in yellow right here actually belongs to Venezuela. And if that's the case, then this green block is what actually belongs to Venezuela. That's their waterway, because you go 200 miles out, right? Perpendicular to the coastline. And if you do that, then the entire Stabroek, imagine coming down to about right here, like where it says Area 6, it's roughly in that region, I believe. That would be all Venezuela. Like this entire yellow area is considered Essequibo is the territory. Guyana, Essequibo, and they're saying that's actually part of Venezuela. It always has been. And so then you would draw the line going straight across, right? And that basically takes the majority of this block. The yellow in this block represents what's actively available, what's actively being pumped. The blue are available blocks that have not been tapped yet. So you can see that most of this yellow would end up going to Venezuela once this whole thing gets resolved and this dispute gets resolved. Now, I'm wondering, this is just my speculation, but I'm wondering, and then you can see this map right here showing the British Commonwealth, the current British Empire. Every country in blue is a British Commonwealth country. And of course, Guyana is one of them. And so you take Guyana, you cut it in half all the way down to here. Guyana becomes this skinny little country. And basically that entire block right here becomes part of Venezuela, including the Stabroek block, which is where most of the oil is. I'm wondering if what is actually happening here is that they are like the white hats have sidestepped that whole legal process, which is going to be a long drawn out process. And with Chevron acquiring Hess is, Hess, I think, had like 30% ownership stake of the Stabroek block. I think Exxon had like 40%, and then that Chinese company had the remainder. And so now all the Hess assets go to Chevron. So now Chevron has Hess. And what Exxon tried to do is they try to come in and say, wait a minute, since Chevron is not involved in this oil, like they don't have a license already with the Venezuelan government, they're not involved in this Stabroek block, we should have the right of first refusal. That's what's written in the contract. And then Hess came out and said, that would be true if we were selling the rights to the Stabroek block, but we're not selling the rights to the Stabroek block. We're selling our entire company. And so because we're selling the entire company and it's just a buyout, that is not applicable. And the court in London, or in Paris, I think it was, the court in Paris, the International Chamber of Commerce agreed with Chevron and Hess that because it's a buyout of the entire company, that specific language of right of first refusal for Exxon to buy it does not apply. I wonder if that plays into it. I'm totally speculating now, but as soon as this happens, because this news is announced on July 18th of 2025, that this happens, okay? And then as soon as this happens, all of a sudden you then get, Trump coming out and alleviating alleviating the sanctions on Venezuela, because this is July 19th, the very next day. Venezuela releases the jailed Americans in a deal that frees migrants deported to the U.S. They do the prisoner swap the very next day. And then it's right here, July 25th, a week later. So a week basically after this is all decided by this court, Chevron can resume oil production in Venezuela as Trump reverses policy. So again, there's something happening here. We don't quite know what it is. There's some details that are not going to be public. But then the fact that they issue a private license, it's not a public license, meaning that we can't know the details of what's happening here. It's a little Seuss, but it's also a little dasting. I mean, I'm interested by it. And then we can look at, let's see. So here's the announcement, October 23rd, 2023, Chevron to buy Hess for $53 billion in latest oil mega deal. But here's the real interesting story. 2 months later, or a month and a half after that, what Venezuela's threat to Guyana means for Exxon. Venezuela's escalating claims on oil-rich land in neighboring Guyana are threatening a key growth area for Exxon and Chevron. Venezuelan voters on Sunday approved a referendum called by the government of President Nicolás Maduro to claim sovereignty over a large swath of Guyana. It has long laid claim to, the Associated Press reported. The simmering dispute could challenge Exxon's ability to develop a region that has been among the world's most productive areas since its discovery in 2015. Chevron, too, saw its potential when it agreed in October to acquire Hess and its assets in Guyana, putting Chevron front and center offshore the South American country alongside Exxon. the roughly 380,000 barrels per day that Exxon produces in Guyana account for roughly 10% of its 4 million barrels per day globally, said Stuart Glickman, energy equity analyst at the research firm CFRA. The company plans to expand its production there to more than 1 million barrels per day by the end of the decade. Quote, percentage-wise, Guyana stands to be a bigger and bigger piece of Exxon's production, Glickman says. Quote, if something were to happen, Exxon has something to lose here. Still, the chance that Maduro resorts to military force to enforce his view of the boundary is highly unlikely, energy analysts and observers said. Venezuela already has a bounty of unexploited resources within its borders, yet its production has steadily declined as the struggling nation mismanaged its oil assets, said Francisco Monaldi, a fellow in Latin American energy policy at Rice University's Baker Institute. The oil-rich nation once produced 3.4 million barrels of oil per day, but now produces only 750,000 barrels per day, he said. Venezuela is attempting to ramp up production as the U.S. eases its sanctions, allowing Chevron to invest in production there. If Venezuela wants Chevron to help it restore its oil production, it would be reckless for it to disrupt oil production assets slated to be acquired by the supermajor, Modaldi said. Quote, of course, there's always the risk that they will do something totally irrational and invade the territory, but I think it's highly unlikely. Okay, so again, we're just trying to parse what is happening here, but and this is a little convoluted and a little confusing, but my opinion, that's all it is, just my opinion, is I think what's happened here is that Exxon has a deal with the Guyanese government, if I'm saying that right, the Guyana government, to export oil out of that block, the Stabroek block. All right, its licensing agreement is not with Venezuela; it's with Guyana. So if Chevron, if Exxon were to acquire Hess's 30% stake, that would mean it would have 70% or 75%, whatever the exact percentages are, of ownership in the Stabroek block, and it would be loyal to Guyana, which would basically effectively mean Guyana controls that entire oil belt right there, the Stabroek block. However, now that Chevron has come in during the Biden administration, Biden eases sanctions on Venezuela. Chevron comes in, strikes a deal with Nicolás Maduro, puts in an offer to purchase Hess for whatever, $52 billion. Exxon sues them for doing that because they say Hess should actually belong to us. Exxon loses that court case. Chevron gets acquisition of Hess. And then right after that's finalized and decided, Trump then issues a waiver to Chevron to say, yes, you can export oil from Venezuela. And we're also now learning on the back end, if you read the fine print, it sounds like even though we're not giving cash to Maduro, we're giving him a bunch of oil that he can then turn around and sell, which is money. So this all kind of helps Maduro because Chevron is then financing the pumping of the oil out of the oil reserve versus PDVSA doing it, which we know they're not nearly as good at doing it because it's a government agency. So it's all very murky and convoluted, but I do think that this is proof that, or evidence, I should say, that Trump is helping Maduro just in a very backhanded way, while these neocons that are around Marco Rubio, these Hispanic neocons who are from South Miami and want to use the U.S. military as a bludgeoning tool against their perceived enemies in the region, they are engaging in doing what neocons do, which is regime change. Okay, so let's take a quick break. We'll come back.
Colombia te adoro tanto, tu nombre tiene un encanto. De Bogotá hasta Palenque, me fui con toda la gente.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
Soft disclosure, just dropped new favorites for the season. The lotion, your 5-ounce favorite, is still here. And now we've added full 11-ounce bottles. New lavender tea tree deodorant, clean, calm, and effective. New tallow bars, chamomile lemon rose and naked. Rich moisture that actually works. And on Black Friday, the new arrivals land. Introducing our first men's only formula, beard oil, in unscented and spiced vanilla. Truth, tamed, and finally your beard is too. Tallow lip balms, made with beef tallow and lanolin for serious moisture. Available in chamomile mint, vanilla, naked, and vanilla tangerine. Plus, mini tallow bars, same deep moisture as the full size. Available in vanilla coffee and naked. And finally, lavender vanilla lotion. Smooth, soothing, and worth the wait. On Black Friday, the new products arrive, and so do the Black Friday bundles. Visit softdisclosure.com for truth you can gift. Soft disclosure.
You've been sold a lie that food should be cheap, that grocery store chicken and beef are fine. They're not. At Rattlesnake, they raise protein the right way. Pasture-raised, 21-day aged beef and premium pasture-raised chicken with no subsidies, no shortcuts. It's not cheap to produce. It shouldn't be cheap to eat. Bite back. Think differently about your protein. Visit rattlesnakemeats.com/Badlands, promo code Badlands to get an order sent Monday or Tuesday. Ships to all the lower 48 states, shipping included.
Colombia, tierra tan bella, la madre naturaleza te dio una forma de ser. Colombia say, my favorite place. Colombia, te quiero tanto, que siempre me enamora tu encanto. Colombia, te quiero tanto, que siga bendiciendo tu encanto. Y es que a ti, Colombia, yo te quiero tanto, que siempre me enamora tu encanto. Colombia, te quiero tanto, que siga bendiciendo tu encanto.
All right, welcome back to Geopolitics with Ghost. Just give me a second. Stand by for a second. I'm trying to message Novna. Okay, so she put a rant in for she put a rant in for to check out her Truth Social post, which I'm trying to pull up now. And Klorinovna, I hope I'm saying your name right. If you have a link, drop it in the chat, and I will pull it up. I will pull up that Truth Social post, because what you were saying sounds interesting, and I would like to share it with the class. I'm looking at your feed right now, and I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right post. That explains how Guyana is not British by choice, and that it's basically being controlled by Britain. Let me see. Hold on one second. Copy pasting stuff from one browser to another does not always work in your favor. Yeah, right there. Stand by for processing. All right, so yeah, this is Geopolitics with Ghost. We're gonna go for another 30 minutes or so. And Venezuela has obviously become the focus here of this episode, and that's fine. It's very much in the forefront of everyone's mind. Okay, so she says that here, let me just pull it up on screen. So she says that the colonial strangleholds are being broken everywhere, but it's impossible for that to happen in the Caribbean because it's our closest Five Eyes partner, the British. BS, despite what Ghost maintains, Essequibo, has all of its ties to Guyana and not Venezuela outside the very outermost border regions of eastern Guyana. The dispute is almost entirely rhetorical and has been for decades. The Essequibo has the cultural makeup of the rest of Guyana, including the Afro-Guyanese. I knew I was saying that right. Guyanese, brought by the Dutch as slaves from Africa, and the Indo-Guyanese brought by the Brits from India as indentured servants. Essequibo speaks English, as does the rest of Guyana. None of these cultural ties can be undone. I don't think the oil find is a big deal and can be negotiated between Guyana and Venezuela. It totally ignores the fact that Guyana is a rich country before oil is still living in poverty due to the stranglehold of the Brits directly through the Commonwealth and indirectly an indirect control of CARICOM. By keeping everyone's focus on Venezuela for drugs, oil, elections, etc., it becomes the ultimate distraction from the real problem. The Brits pulled themselves out of information sharing ostensibly about Venezuela, but they don't have any more information about Venezuela than the U.S. does. Who do they actually have more information on that they don't want to share? Answer, pretty much all of CARICOM, with Guyana being the ultimate prize and most important historical and profitable proxies for them. Guyana is the major drug transshipment point to the U.S. and the home of the densest forests in the world and the resources that go with it. Who actually undermined our sovereignty more than the Brits outside of the U.S. with the Russia hoax. President Ali didn't accuse the BBC state media of stealing off the backs of the Guyanese people in early 2024 for his health. He's not meeting with the Saudis because he wants to remain subservient to the British. The British aren't sharing intel with us because I think they know they are the target, not Venezuela. I find it funny that they pulled their information sharing after it was revealed that they were lying in wait for the spoils of any hypothetical U.S. action in Venezuela to unseat Maduro. It also corresponded to President Ali's meeting in Saudi Arabia. Guyana is the prize and coveted by all these military maneuvers. The Brits have the most to lose. That is fascinating analysis, and I think you probably are onto something there. I think that what you're talking about makes a lot of sense. I can pull up the article that you're referring to for people to see, because I remember reporting on this or writing about it recently. Let's see. British Venezuela intel sharing. I want to say this happened a couple weeks ago. Yep, 2 weeks ago. And so from Sky News, the UK stopped some intelligence sharing with U.S. boats over U.S. over boat strikes in Caribbean. The U.S. has reported carrying out 14 strikes in September on vessels near the Venezuelan coast. Venezuela says they are illegal, amount to murder in our aggression against the sovereign South American nation. The UK has reportedly stopped sharing some intelligence with the U.S. on suspected drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean following concerns over America's strikes against the vessels. The U.S. has reportedly carried out strikes, yada, yada, yada. We know about all that. Britain controls several territories in the Caribbean where it bases intelligence assets and has long assisted the U.S. in identifying vessels suspected of smuggling narcotics. That information helped the U.S. Coast Guard locate the ships, seize drugs, and detain crews. CNN cited sources as saying, but officials are concerned that the Trump administration's actions may be illegal. Oh no. The intelligence sharing pause began more than a month ago, CNN reported, quoting sources as saying Britain shares UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk's assessment that the strikes amount to extrajudicial killings. The reports could provide an awkward backdrop for a meeting between Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper and her U.S. counterpart Marco Rubio Expected on Wednesday at the G7 Foreign Ministerial Summit in Canada. A number 10 spokesman did not deny the move when asked about the pause in intelligence sharing. Quote, "We don't comment on security or intelligence matters," the official said in response to repeated questions. Quote, "The U.S. is our closest partner on defense, security, and intelligence, but in line with a long-standing principle, I'm not just going to comment on intelligence matters." He added that decisions on this are a matter for the U.S. and that issues around whether or not anything is against international law is a matter for a competent international court, not for governments to determine. Oh, okay. A Pentagon official told CNN the department doesn't talk about intelligence matters. On Monday, Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, now styled as the War Secretary, said on X that the previous day, 2 lethal kinetic strikes were conducted on 2 vessels operated by designated terrorist organizations. He said these vessels are known by our intelligence to be associated with illicit narcotics smuggling. We're carrying narcotics and we're transiting along a known narco trafficking transit route to the Eastern Pacific. Both strikes were conducted in international waters and 3 male narco terrorists were aboard each vessel. All 6 were killed. No U.S. forces were harmed. The United Nations Human Rights Chief has described the U.S. strikes on alleged drug dealers off the coast of South America as unacceptable and a violation of international human rights law. Yeah, so I think that Kloranova makes some really good points here. I think that the situation with Guyana is more complicated than it appears. The assertion, though, that the Guyanese people are somehow like, I agree with you that it's the British controlling the Guyanese and it's against it's probably against their will. Many such cases throughout the entire world, including Canada, including the United States itself. Whether or not Essequibo would become part of Venezuela, that's an interesting debate and not one that I would be the most read in person to lead, but could certainly participate in. But I do think that understanding the British control the Guyanese government and also control the asset management firms, Glencore, Vitol, Trafigura, the people who control the oil, they would be able to leverage all those relationships and those connections to undermine Venezuela in a much more drastic way than I think ostensibly is happening here. I think Heather Jones in the chat pointed out that if Exxon were granted Hess's percentage ownership, whatever it is, 30%, 35%, that would give Exxon basically a monopoly on the Staybrook block. That's a really, really good point. 75% ownership of it. So very, very interesting. I think all of that is really, really interesting. And I appreciate the note. So thank you, Novna. I hope I'm saying the name right. All right. So getting back to Venezuela, because we're going to keep going down this hole a little deeper. There's a few more things I wanted to cover. Let's see. This is from El País, which I believe stands for the country, if I'm not mistaken, if my Spanish is not rusty. Venezuela on the brink. That is interesting. They speak English in Guyana, though. And she's right that President Ali, the president of Guyana, has been meeting with MBS a bunch. MBS hosted CARICOM right around the time that these militia groups started popping up on the border of Venezuela and Guyana and starting these destabilizing activities. I don't view that as Guyana attacking Venezuela. I view that as a proxy group operating out of Guyana under the protection of the British Crown attacking Venezuela. So those are two different things, but I just want to be clear about that. So this headline is Venezuela on the brink of the unknown, psychological warfare, isolation, and a tense standoff with the U.S. The suspension of international flights to Caracas due to the risks of flying over Venezuelan territory has raised tensions in the region. The sudden suspension on Saturday of most international flights to Caracas after the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration warned of risks of flying over Venezuelan airspace has heightened fears about a crisis of still unknown dimensions. And it goes on to list all of the different airlines that are involved that we've already listed off. It says tensions between the two countries are running high, talking about the U.S. and Venezuela. The United States continues its unprecedented naval development in the Caribbean, while Maduro has responded by digging in, mobilizing the Bolivarian National Armed Forces and armed civilian groups. Although there are no visible signs of divisions within the military, experts warn that internal discontent could surface if the situation escalates. Outside Venezuela, particularly among the diaspora, voices continue to insist that U.S. action could open the door to a democratic transition. Many continue to assert opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez Urruchia's electoral victory and believe all internal avenues for removing the Maduro government have been exhausted. They place their hopes in a peaceful transition referenced by Maria Corina Machado, who is convinced that there is little popular support for the regime and that the population is too exhausted to endure a prolonged conflict. Inside Venezuela, caution and fear prevail. The desire for change is widespread, but so is concern, especially among the elites, that violent chaos could erupt at any moment if the armed forces do not support a transition. At the same time, another warning is constantly repeated. Do not underestimate Chavismo, a political structure spread throughout the country with cadres trained for years in the civil military model and capable of territorial control. People speak about the issue in hushed tones as though naming it might precipitate further unrest. Politics, increasingly pushed out of public life, has left a vacuum filled with speculation, fear, and silence. Sounds like they're describing a little bit of devolution there. I guess we'll see what happens. But psychological warfare and targeted strikes for Mariano de Alba, a lawyer specializing in international law and diplomacy. The U.S. military deployment, while sustainable for a time, cannot continue indefinitely. It is a warning to the Venezuelan regime, but also a message to the world that Washington will have to consider, quote, eventually it will likely have to be scaled back to some degree, he notes. Maria Puerto Riara, a researcher at the Latin American Studies Association, agrees with this assessment. She believes that that U.S. domestic politics is a key factor. Quote, polls are beginning to show discontent because the president is paying more attention to what is happening abroad than what is happening at home. There is neither appetite nor justification for supporting Donald Trump in a military operation. But she cautions that Trump's own volatility makes any prediction difficult. Quote, the strategy is to have no strategy, to keep the Maduro regime from knowing if there will be a clear signal. It's psychological warfare. And then it goes on to say the impossible negotiation. And it says a political transition in Venezuela could be only open if a U.S. military operation triggered deep fractures within the various factions that keep the regime in place. A broad wave of defections, more than a sustained military offensive, would be the key to any negotiation process. But that path, he warns, is uncertain. It depends largely on political developments in Washington. Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. That if anything, a military attack on Venezuela is only going to galvanize, the factions and bring them closer together as they, fight back to back, so to speak, against the invaders. So it might actually have the opposite effect to what Maria Corina Machado claims it's going to have. So we'll have to see. But that is all really, really interesting. And then here's an article that talks about the warlike power of Chavismo. And I think it explains that the military exercises that the Chavista regime has recently been carrying out in Venezuela represent a progressive deterrent effort displayed to its internal and its external and internal enemies, and have become particularly noticeable in the streets and in the Venezuelan media after the controversial presidential elections of July 28, in which this is from January of 2025, in which Nicolás Maduro declared himself the winner. So yeah, this is even before Trump started escalating the rhetoric. They were already doing these demonstrations in the street in Venezuela. So that's really interesting. And I think the last thing we'll hit on Venezuela is this article that somebody from the chat, and forgive me for not noting who it was Wolf Barney. And this is a little interesting. And so I haven't read this article. I just looked at the headline, but let's take a look at it together and see if it amounts to much. The UNS Review, an alternative media selection. Okay. From Jose Alberto Nino, the untold Jewish role in Venezuela's crisis. The United States is edging toward an unprecedented military showdown with Venezuela. So the reason I find this headline interesting, I mean, obviously we talk a lot about Israel, but Nicolás Maduro has been particularly aggressive in his rhetoric towards Netanyahu and the Zionists. And then Maria Corina Machado has been simping for Netanyahu, sending him letters asking for his assistance in overthrowing Maduro. So there's obviously some sort of a Zionist role in this that needs to be parsed out and understood. It says the crisis escalated earlier this month after a U.S. drone strike killed 11 members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, the first such strike in Latin America since the 1989 invasion of Panama. Days later, Venezuelan F-16s flew over U.S. naval vessels, triggering Pentagon warnings and threats from President Donald Trump that approaching aircraft would be shot down. Washington has since deployed its largest Caribbean naval presence in decades, including 4,500 soldiers and Marines, Tomahawk-equipped destroyers, submarines, an amphibious assault ship, and 10 F-35s stationed in Puerto Rico. This confrontation follows Venezuela's disputed July 2024 election, widely condemned as fraudulent, in which opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez claimed victory, but the Electoral Council declared Nicolás Maduro the winner. Jewish political scientist Stephen Levinsky described the official results as one of the most egregious electoral frauds in modern Latin American history. Protests left at least 22 dead and resulted in more than 2,000 arrests. Once Donald Trump returned to office, his administration ramped up sanctions and terrorism designations, labeling Tren de Aragua and the Cartel de los Soles as narco-terrorist organizations and invoking the Alien Enemies Act against Venezuelan nationals connected to these groups. The roots of hostility stretch back to Hugo Chavez's rise in 1999, his survival of a U.S.-backed coup in 2002, of which Maria Corina Machado was part of that coup, the failed coup, and decades of mounting sanctions, indictments, and efforts at regime change. Analysts see Trump's current escalation as a revival of the Monroe Doctrine, Washington's longstanding claim to hemispheric hegemony. Yet what makes today's crisis uniquely combustible is Venezuela's deepening ties to Russia, which signed a sweeping 10-year strategic agreement with Maduro in May 2025, and to China, which openly opposed the U.S. naval buildup. Venezuela, sitting atop the world's largest proven oil reserves, 300 billion barrels, 17% of the global total, interesting number, has become not only a prize of energy geopolitics, but also a node in the emerging Moscow-Beijing-Caracas axis. However, beneath the surface of this escalating military confrontation lies an overlooked dimension, the Jewish angle in U.S.-Venezuelan relations. Israel's strategic concerns have played a significant role in shaping the American policy towards Caracas, as Venezuela has emerged as the most consistently anti-Zionist country in South America. There you go. Jewish factions within the U.S. foreign policy establishment have increasingly viewed Caracas as a threat, extending well beyond traditional hemispheric security concerns. Venezuela's anti-Zionist evolution under Chavez, the deterioration of Venezuelan-Israeli relations accelerated during the second intifada, when Chavez's government sponsored rallies supporting the Palestinian cause. The first direct targeting of Venezuela's Jewish community occurred in May 2004 when the Sephardic Tiferet Israel synagogue in Caracas was attacked following a government-backed pro-Palestinian rally. The situation escalated dramatically during the 2006 Lebanon war when Chavez accused Israel of carrying out a genocide. In August 2006, Venezuela recalled its ambassador from Israel and later declared, "Israel has gone mad. They are massacring children, and no one knows how many are buried." Okay, so that was in 2006. Venezuela's complete break with Israel came on January 14, 2009, during Operation Cast Lead in Gaza. Chavez described Israel's military offensive as a cruel persecution of the Palestinian people directed by Israeli authorities. The Venezuelan Foreign Ministry announced the severance of diplomatic ties, stating the move was made, quote, given the inhumane persecution of the Palestinian people carried out by the authorities of Israel. Following this diplomatic break, Venezuela officially recognized Palestine on April 27, 2009, becoming the first country in the Americas to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Palestinian Authority. Wow, okay. That was 2009. Likud in Caracas, the Israeli hand behind Venezuela's opposition. The Venezuelan opposition has taken a dramatically different approach to relations with Israel. This is epitomized by Maria Corina Machado, head of the Liberal Party Vinte Venezuela, who in July 2020 signed a formal cooperation agreement with Israel's ruling Likud party. The agreement pledged collaboration on a political, ideological, and social matters, as well as advancing cooperation on issues related to strategy, geopolitics, and security. It explicitly stated its goals to, quote, bring the people of Israel closer to the people of Venezuela while advancing together the Western values of freedom, liberty, and market economy. Machado described this as sending, quote, a clear message to Nicolás Maduro and indicated that if she came into power, she would restore diplomatic relations with Israel. Israel's recognition of Juan Guaido. Israel was among the first countries to recognize Juan Guaido as Venezuela's interim president during the 2019 presidential crisis. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced Israel's recognition on January 27, 2019, stating that Israel joins the United States today, as well as Canada, most South American countries, and European nations. According to Axios, the Trump administration had specifically asked Israel to publicly support the regime change campaign against Maduro. Guaido thanked Netanyahu for the recognition, with rhetoric explicitly linking Venezuela's struggle to Holocaust liberation. 74 years ago, the Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated, and today, just as our country is also fighting for its freedom, we thank the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, for the recognition and the support. Venezuela has forged strong ties. It's talking now about the strategic alliance with Iran. Venezuela has forged strong ties with the Islamic Republic of Iran since 1999, creating what both countries describe as an axis of unity against U.S. imperialism. Chavez's first visit to Iran in 2001 launched what would become a strategic partnership based on shared resistance to the Judeo-American imperium's overreach in their respective spheres of influence. The relationship deepened after Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's election as Iran's president in 2005. Through multiple exchanges, Chavez and Ahmadinejad established hundreds of bilateral deals. Their alliance grew so close that in 2006, Chavez vowed to stay by Iran at any time and under any condition. During an address at Tehran University in 2010, Chavez warned, quote, if the U.S. empire succeeds in consolidating its dominance, then humankind has no future. Therefore, we have to save humankind and put an end to the U.S. empire. I assume he's referring to like the globalist empire, which I would agree with him on that. All right, the Hezbollah connection. It says, under Maduro of Venezuela, Iran relations have continued to consolidate, with Tehran providing gasoline shipments during fuel shortages, military cooperation, including drone technology, sanctions, invasion assistance, and a multi-billion-dollar trade and investment deal. The Hezbollah connection, the Iran-Venezuela partnership has extended to include Hezbollah, a longtime ally of Iran, that has created security concerns for Empire Judaica. I think they're referring to the Jewish diaspora. U.S. officials assert that Iran and Hezbollah maintain operational networks within Venezuela that facilitate narcotics trafficking and money laundering schemes. These networks reportedly work with Venezuelan military elites in the Cartel de los Soles to move cocaine, with Hezbollah allegedly serving as a main finance and money launder for narco-terrorism groups like Tren de Aragua. Security experts claim Hezbollah operates in Venezuela through clan-based structures embedded within the Maduro government's illicit economy. The Venezuelan airline Conviasa conducts regular flights between Caracas, Damascus, and Tehran, which Hezbollah reportedly uses to ferry operatives, recruits, and cargo in and out of the region. These allegations of Hezbollah infiltration further fueled Maduro's framing of his domestic opposition as part of a larger Zionist conspiracy. Maduro's international Zionism accusations. Following Venezuela's disputed 2024 election, Maduro repeatedly blamed international Zionism for Venezuela's internal problems. In August 2024, after widespread protests over alleged electoral fraud, Maduro claimed that his opposition was supported and bankrolled by international Zionist networks. Quote, all the communication power of Zionism, who controls all social networks, the satellites, and all the power behind this coup d'etat, Maduro declared in a televised speech. He also described Argentina's President Javier Milei, who currently leads Latin America's most philo-Semitic government, as a Zionist and a social sadist. Maduro's remarks drew sharp criticism from Deborah Lipstadt, then U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, who accused him of reviving classic anti-Semitic tropes about Jews controlling global affairs. Quote, Maduro's absurd claim that Jews are behind election protests in Venezuela is anti-Semitic and unacceptable. Lipstadt tweeted, the Venezuelan people have gone to the streets to peacefully call for their votes to be counted. We reject all forms of anti-Semitism, and the use of these types of age-old tropes fan the flames of Jew hatred in Latin America and throughout the world. All right, then it's the last section, I think, is the enduring neoconservative order. The American approach to Venezuela cannot be understood without recognizing the influence of neoconservative ideology on U.S. foreign policy over the last 30 years. Neoconservatism posits that the United States is an exceptional polity and must export its model of democracy far and wide, but this only scratches the surface. Its ultimate goal is to make the world safe for Zionist supremacy, an ideological current marked by significant Jewish overrepresentation. Stephen McGlinchey, a senior lecturer in international relations at the University of the West of England, observed, quote, the core postulate of the neoconservative Bush foreign policy package, revolutionary democratization, revolutionary democratization is intricately tied to Israel's security. Under this Jewish supremacist framework, any country adopting a principled anti-Zionist stance is viewed as a threat to Judeo-American interests. Like many Jewish movements, neoconservatism relies on servile Gentiles to implement its agenda. Currently, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a longtime interventionist with an eye toward remaking Latin America in the United States' dysfunctional image, is spearheading the campaign to topple the Maduro government. A regime change booster, Rubio has maintained close ties to Venezuelan opposition figures such as Maria Corina Machado, pushing for harsher sanctions and greater diplomatic isolation. Venezuela's affinity with Iran, the bete noir of world Jewry, further motivates Rubio and his Jewish patrons to pursue punitive measures against Caracas. Any country that deviates from this consensus becomes a fresh target for regime change. The breakdown in U.S.-Venezuela relations represents a complex intersection of hemispheric hegemony, energy geopolitics, and Jewish concerns. While oil reserves and great power competition provide the obvious explanations for American hostility, the Israeli factor adds a crucial dimension that has been consistently underestimated in political analysis. By emerging as South America's most reliably anti-Zionist country, aligning with Iran and tolerating Hezbollah's presence, Venezuela has drawn the ire of Jewish policymakers in Washington who interpret challenges to Israel as pretext for expanding U.S. power in defense of Zionist objectives. Taken together, these dynamics reveal how Venezuela's defiance is not viewed in Washington merely as a hemispheric issue, but as part of a larger ideological battle tied to Israel's security and the global reach of Zionist influence. With Jewish interests shaping foreign policy at the highest levels, the pursuant of genuine U.S. interests become impossible. Well, that is a really interesting article. When is that dated from? That is dated from September 22nd, so 2 months ago. I'm going to bookmark that. That is a good article. I appreciate bookmark that. Appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, so that actually brings us, I think, to a good stopping point. I have one more thing that I wanted to share, which was actually, I have two more articles I want to talk about. I'm not going to read the articles like we just did. That was a little exhausting. I appreciate y'all sticking with me through it. The first is this one from last week. We didn't get a chance to talk about it on Friday because we were so focused on the Saudi stuff. And then by the time we got to Russia, I didn't get a chance to talk about this article. But Venezuela extends There we go. Let's see. Venezuela extends Russian oil ventures. The National Assembly has approved a 15-year renewal for 2 joint oil fields. The Venezuelan parliament has approved a 15-year extension of joint ventures between the state company PDVSA and Russian oil firm Rosneft. God, those Russian words are hard. According to a statement on the National Assembly's website, the deepening energy cooperation comes despite sweeping U.S. sanctions on both nations and amid accusations that Washington wants to depose President Nicolás Maduro under the guise of an anti-corruption or an anti-drug campaign. The extension announced on Thursday allows the joint ventures operating oil fields in western Venezuela to continue until 2041, with lawmakers estimating roughly 91 million barrels of crude oil over the period and an investment of about $616 million. The move follows a broad strategic partnership signed last month by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Maduro. Rosneft was created in 2020 after the U.S. sanctioned 2 subsidiaries of state oil firm Rosneft for helping market Venezuelan crude, prompting the company's retreat from the country. The new state-owned firm soon acquired Rosneft's Venezuelan assets, allowing Russia to maintain its presence in the sector. And then just goes on to kind of explain some background about PDVSA. And what's interesting about the PDVSA stuff is that was the company that filed. Let me see if I can pull up this PDF. That was the company that filed the lawsuits initially. Here it is. Let me open this with my browser. So here is the actual. Now this filing I think is from 2019. So this is I think the finalized. Yeah, March 8th, 2019. So this is when the judge this is in the Southern District of Florida dismissed the case. They dismissed the case against these 42 asset management executives, Glencore being just one of them. There's Glencore listed right there. Okay. But it started in March of 2018. That was when this stuff was all filed by Boyce, Schiller, Flexner. You can see him listed right there by David Boyce, who is Maduro's lawyer here. So PDVSA is the one who actually filed these charges against these oil executives, accusing them of corruption, of international organized corruption. And the reason that this gets dismissed is because Trump brings the sanctions against Venezuela, which then gives them the argument that this is now a national security issue and discovery is going to compromise national security. So this is very, very interesting lawfare case. And maybe one day I'll sit down with Ash and CanCon and we'll dig into it. So let's see. The other 2 articles I just wanted to hit real quick was, I think we talked about this last week, but we touched on it, but just Trump okay with launching strikes in Mexico. We did talk about Claudia Sheinbaum and my uncertainty that she's actually which side she falls on. But yeah, I mean, Trump is, the quote is, would I launch strikes in Mexico to stop drugs? Okay with me, whatever we have to do to stop drugs. We know every route, we know the addresses of every drug lord. Trump added, they're killing our people. That's like a war. Would I do it? I'd be proud to do it. So yeah, I know we talked about that last week. But the other article I wanted to touch on was this one. And this is where it gets really silly and stupid. This is where it's like, all right, we are beclowning ourselves by taking this seriously. Details revealed of Trump-approved covert action plan for Venezuela. Washington's strategy could involve military, psychological, and information pressure, according to the New York Times. U.S. President Donald Trump has green-lighted additional measures to pressure Venezuela and prepare for a potential broader military campaign, including covert CIA operations targeting President Nicolás Maduro's government, the New York Times has reported, citing U.S. officials. At the same time, Trump has approved a new round of back-channel negotiations that were that reportedly led to the Venezuelan president offering to step down after a delay of several years, a proposal the White House rejected, the outlet said on Monday. The Pentagon has deployed warships to the Caribbean and has carried out controversial strikes on small boats it claims are involved in drug smuggling from Venezuela. The White House maintains that Maduro is an illegitimate cartel-linked ruler, fueling speculation that direct military action might be imminent. Maduro has denied the drug trafficking allegations and warned the U.S. against launching a crazy war. According to the NYT, while Trump has not yet deployed combat forces to Venezuela, Washington's next steps could involve, quote, sabotage or some sort of cyber, psychological, or information operations aimed at increasing pressure on the Maduro government. Among the reported preparations, U.S. military planners have compiled lists of alleged drug facilities and are considering strikes on military units aligned with Maduro. According to the outlet, Trump convened 2 meetings in the White House Situation Room last week to discuss Venezuela and evaluate strategies with senior U.S. advisors. This would be 2 weeks ago. While instructing the CIA to prepare covert operations, Trump simultaneously resumed back-channel negotiations with Maduro after briefly pausing talks last month. Sources familiar with the situation told the outlet. During these informal discussions, Maduro reportedly indicated a willingness to grant U.S. energy companies access to Venezuela's oil reserves. Trump alleged the negotiations on Sunday, stating, quote, we may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how it turns out. Well, there you go. Venezuela has condemned the military buildup as a violation of sovereignty and a coup attempt, placing its military on high alert. Russia recently reaffirmed its support for the country's leadership in defending its sovereignty. That's all fascinating. I think that's very, very fascinating. And again, all this stuff is connected. Like, we spend a lot of time in one episode talking about one place, but hopefully it becomes clear how these places all tie to one another. I mean, we didn't get to talk about Moscow and Ukraine today. That's this week, that's the big story. The big story is the purported peace deal. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that on Friday. We will do a show on Friday. So we will spend probably the whole episode on Friday talking about Russia and Ukraine. And then maybe on the tail end of it, if we have time, we'll get into the Middle East and some reemerging Middle East storylines. I did want to share this post from Colonel Towner Watkins, who texted me, and I didn't want to read her text message. My kids are home, so bear with me if they come on screen. So I didn't want to read her text message she sent me because, it's private text, but I don't think she would really care. But she's basically asking me about the same thing she's posting here. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. It says, y'all, to say I'm disappointed in the recent various podcasters embracing CIA agents telling them that Venezuela is behind all the nefarious election interference all over the world would be an understatement. I've spent 3 years explaining to anyone that would listen how it is the CIA that has interfered in every consequential election since 1948, including our own. Trump recently posted the need to address election integrity, and social media explodes with CIA agents all pointing a finger at Venezuela, the same Venezuela the CIA has actively been trying to overthrow since 2000. All of us want to get to the bottom of election interference. So let me point something out to all of you. Alex Saab was on a mission to Turkey and Iran to arrange food for Venezuela because of crippling sanctions placed on them by the U.S. and their cohorts. The CIA arranged for him to be arrested in a country where he stopped to refuel that had no extradition treaty with the U.S. and arranged, despite that, to have him extradited to the U.S. for trial on an Interpol arrest warrant that Pompeo arranged to have backdated. Now the CIA wants you to believe that they can track people like Saba anywhere, arrest them under nefarious circumstances, and yet supposedly for decades they've been unable to secure U.S. elections. New Venezuela was operating all these foreign influence operations of election interference, and they simply couldn't do anything about it. The CIA knew that Venezuela was interfering in U.S. elections and never told anyone. And CISA announced 2020 was perfect. I mean, she's absolutely right. Like, they said 2020 was the most secure election of all time, and now when it's politically convenient, they're saying, yeah, but Maduro actually was the one interfering in our elections. It's such bullshit and laugh out loud funny. And by the way, we didn't even analyze that last article where President Trump is saying, I have authorized covert CIA operations in Venezuela. They're very secret. Please don't tell. I'm I'm paraphrasing now because he didn't say any of this, but he should have. Don't tell Maduro that this is happening, because I don't want Maduro to know that we're coming, but I just want to let y'all to know that covert CIA operations are underway right now in Venezuela. So shh, don't tell Maduro. Does that make any sense? Okay, I'm going back to Colonel Tanner Watkins' post. Does that make any sense to you? You have an organization that interfered in elections for 80 years, blaming a country they are actively trying to overthrow of election interference. Oh, and after listening to a few of these reveals, not a single CIA agent revealed that they created Cartel of the Sun, had the 2 National Guard generals on their payroll for years. Would that be an important point if they're being honest? None of them discussed the CIA's role in USAID, OTI, DAI, NED, which is National Endowment for Democracies, IRI, and NDI, spending hundreds of millions of dollars before and after Chavez election in election interference in Venezuela. Why is that? Yeah, she's 100% right. And yeah, and she basically is saying the same thing in the text she sent to me. But it's maddening to listen to people talk about this stuff, and they're ignoring glaring facts. They're ignoring really, really important data. And my kids are here, so I'm going to have to sign off now. But
Hi, world. I'm
okay. Okay. Yes. Very cute. Yeah, buddy. All right, so I think it's time for us to sign off. And you know what? It's actually a great time.
Bye-bye.
It's a great time to do this for the kids to be here, because they are going to recognize this song. We are going to sign off this song.
Oh, what song is it?
All right, y'all. We will see you on Friday. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Be good to each other. See you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.